Well, we are joined by, I think, what I would call a true Notre Dame Renaissance man. He's a former Notre Dame baseball player. He's chuckling at me already. He's also an author, and he currently works at Notre Dame in the transition program as the transition program director in academic services for student athletes at Notre Dame. That is a long title, but he comes from also what I consider to be the first family of college baseball. Nick Mainieri. Nick, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Absolutely. It's great to see you as well. Tell me about, first of all, the transition program director in academic services. What does that entail for you?
Yeah. So I work in academic services for student athletes, which is an academic unit on campus that works exclusively with student athletes. And work with great people in here: Pat Holmes, Adam Sargent. I know you probably know some of them.
Right.
My role specifically, I direct what are called our transition programs, and most specifically, that's our summer bridge program, where we
Okay.
have a good portion of student athletes, incoming student athletes, first year student athletes, who will start school in June, and as sort of a way to sort of learn their way around campus, start taking classes, learn about resources, participate in summer workouts, those kinds of things. And then I also work very closely with the early enrollees, all the guys that come in January, guys and gals. And most of my role is spent thinking actively and creatively with first year student athletes as they're trying to map out their time here.
Interesting. So other than the coaches of those, those sports that those student athletes are with, you're kind of one of the first people that they really sort of get acquainted with once they're here at Notre Dame, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
once they, once they've been recruited, and once they've decided this is where they're coming, and I start getting involved in the months before they get here, and I bother them
Okay.
with a lot of emails and phone calls and things like that.
Okay. Interesting. So, we were catching up a little bit right before we started this interview, but I was kind of thinking about this morning, getting ready for this. It's been about a year since we saw each other in person, and that was when your dad, Paul, and his 2002 Notre Dame College World Series team came to town for that 20th anniversary last year. And again, it spurred me thinking a little bit. You were in high school that season, 2002. You weren't a Notre Dame student yet. So, what was it like for you at that reunion a year ago? Kind of catching up with some of those guys at that reunion.
Yeah, that's right. That is the last time we saw each other. That was a really fun weekend when all those guys
It
were back.
was.
That was cool. Yeah, that was my senior year of high school. And I mean, for me, it was it was it was a family affair. It was an exciting thing, and since I was 4 years old, probably I'd been around my dad's teams. I grew up in the dugouts with him, and so I always had guys on his teams that I considered friends or mentors, or like guys that I really liked. So just hanging around him, and then by the time I was 18 or so, there were guys that I'd become friendly with on the team. Um, and then a couple of years later, I was teammates with some of those guys. But I knew them all pretty well, and if I ever had the chance to come over to practice and things like that, I was always over here just trying to spend as much time
Sure.
around my dad and the team as possible. So it was always really, it was really exciting. And then seeing those guys again, some of them I hadn't seen in a long time, so it was neat just to kind of reconnect with people and hear what they've been doing with their lives and meet their families and all that kind of thing.
I remember your dad used to talk about when he was a kid, when your grandpa Doc was coaching, that your dad's guy that he was attached to was Bucky Dent, back before Bucky Dent was Bucky Dent, hitting the home run against the Yanks, the Red Sox for the Yankees and all that kind of stuff. Did you have your version of Bucky Dent, I guess,
Oh
when you
yeah,
were a kid?
on all the teams I had different guys. I when I was I'm trying to remember how old I was when I was in elementary school. My guy was Randall Brooks. I don't know if you remember Randall Brooks, who he would
Remember
have.
the name, but he was before my time here. Yeah.
Yeah, he played second base on my dad's first teams here at Notre Dame, and I always really loved watching him play. And whenever I got to go, my dad was always so good. He'd always try to bring me on trips whenever he could, even when I was a kid. And so Randy Brooks was always the guy I wanted to talk to in the airports as we were walking to the planes stuff. And And, you know, when you look back on it, you think, oh, I was like an annoying little kid just walking around and bothering everybody. But everybody was always so good to me. People
I'm
were always
sure.
much better to me than they probably should have been.
That's funny. You know, that Omaha team in 2002, it was, you know, your dad, of course, went on to lead LSU to a national championship and multiple College World Series, but that was his first, and he's talked about how special that was as his first. Like for you, are there any particular sort of memories, moments that stand out to you from that 2002?
Well, you know, that year, I mean, it was a really remarkable year. You know, when you follow it, they had gotten off to such a slow start and then turned the corner in really dramatic fashion once the conference play had started. And then going into the postseason, you know, I was still in high school, so I wasn't present for all of it, you know, but there was so much that happened at the end of that year, winning the conference tournament for the first
Right.
time, going through the regional, going down to Florida State, you know, and then at the same time within my family, my grandfather, my mom's dad, was dying at that time, and so he passed away right in the middle of all of that.
Right.
So it was a big confluence of just really emotional things happening. But then I remember being out in Omaha, and you know, I was 18, my brother Tommy was 7, and I remember walking around Rosenblatt Stadium with my dad before one of the games in the outfield, and just kind of taking in the sights and sounds and everything, and just really kind of, my dad's always been very good about in those big moments making sure that people kind of stop and appreciate what's happening around them, you know.
Right.
And that's one of those moments I really remember. Yeah.
Well, and you know, and I'm going to get to the, you know, to sort of the big reason I promise, you know, that I had you on, you know, because it's something that you read, but I mean, all of this is bringing back a lot of things as well, but it just makes me think back to, you know, some of those moments, like when your you know, like your brother Tommy, who you mentioned, he's what, in his late 20s now. He's
Mm-hmm.
Jesse's age,
Yeah.
you know, and you know, like we're all a little bit older now, but like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like I can, you know, there are just days I remember where like you're on the team and Tommy's just a couple years older than that, and he's in and out of the dugout, you know, in the clubhouse doing his thing, and you know, I'm like going in to sit down to record your dad's pregame interview, and there's your grandpa, you know, sitting in the
Yeah.
corner, the sage, you know, wisdom of Doc Mainieri. And you know, your sisters, you know, they were, you know, a part of that when they were younger, obviously as well. And it's always been just such a family affair with the Mainieris when it comes to even those days of the game.
Yeah, that's true, you know, and I think we were always conscious of that when we were young, and both of my parents always worked so hard to make sure that the family was involved in those things. You know, the life of a coach is so busy, and there's so much travel, and you know that when you're a kid, you're sharing, you know, your parents' time with other kids, you know, that they're
Yeah.
working with. But it's something that I always appreciated, but I've come to appreciate even more now that I'm older, and I have a kid. I have a boy who's going to be 8 this week, actually, and
Man.
and I think about, you know, I think about everything that my parents used to do and my dad used to do in order to make sure that we were part of his life around the team,
Right.
and just how, you know, how I don't know that it was challenging for him, but there's so much that you're always thinking about, and then to also be involving everybody at the same time, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's what he wanted to be doing, but it puts it in a new perspective for me now,
I bet.
thinking about just how much you have going on, and yet also still managing to make sure you're present to your family and that they're around. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So I have buried the lead a little bit because, you know, again,
That's
the
okay.
reason I asked you to come on today is this article that you wrote recently
Yeah.
for Notre Dame magazine. And it's an excellent piece. And so like for our listeners, viewers, it's just go to the Notre Dame magazine website. Do you know the website off the
Yeah,
top of
you
your
just
head?
go to magazine.nd.edu.
Okay. Okay. So we follow each other on Twitter, and I don't see you tweet a lot of links to different things. But then I saw you tweet this link, and I'm like, okay, I'll check this out. If he's going to this link, it's got to be worth checking out. And it's titled "Extra Innings. Here's what can happen when grown-ups aren't ready for their playing days to be over." And here's how it starts out. I'm going to read the like the first paragraph or so from
Okay.
this, maybe first couple paragraphs. Okay, so you'll have to bear with me here.
Go for it. No, better you than me. Yeah.
Okay. The Studebaker Larks' red jerseys stand out against the winter yellow grass of the public ballpark, a rugged, bad hop-afflicted surface on the western outskirts of South Bend, Indiana, not far from the gravel pits of Bendix Drive and the city's small airport. Jet engines burble in gray sky, and the day is getting colder by the minute. The South Shore Liners, the Larks' opponent, huddle in foul territory. Back-to-back league champs, the Liners have an adversarial regard for punctuality. Larks manager John Pinter hooks his fingers in the chain link fronting the dugout. Second baseman Jay Campanigro rakes the damp clay with his spikes. I hope I said that right. First baseman Milt Lee hollers at the Liners, "Are we playing mini baseball today?" Liners player manager Mike Hebler hollers back, "I'm finishing my speech, Milt." It is May 1st, 2022, opening day of the Sappy Moffitt Baseball League. So that's how this article starts out. Excellent, by the way. And you had me hooked, because like I'm reading this. One thing that stood out, though, is like none of the Liners could have played for your dad, of course, because, the punctuality thing alone would have gotten him kicked off the team, I think, or at least suspended for a little while. But second, I was hooked, for the rest of what? 3, 4, 5,000 words. It's fairly lengthy. I don't know. Do you know what the word count ended up being?
I think it's about 4,500 words.
4,500? Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the descriptiveness that you have, though, and I remember that from your novel, The Infinite, that you released a few years back as well, it's like that descriptiveness. First of all, is that just something that came naturally to you? Is that something, you really had to work to develop, because I feel like I could easily hear James Earl Jones, like narrating the Field of Dreams speech and those words coming out of his mouth.
Thanks. Yeah. I don't know. My style, if I'm writing fiction or nonfiction, it tends to be really narrative driven, right? And descriptive, and setting is really important. And I don't know why. I mean, it's always the kinds of things that I like to read. And I think my, little mental weirdness and how I sort of see stories in my head, it tends to be cinematic in that way. Or when I see little details, it's how can I describe that, and those are always the things that have made stories come alive for me. It's not the same for everybody, but that's
Sure.
just where it ends up being for me, is in those physical details.
So the Sappy Moffitt League,
Yeah.
First of all, it's like Sappy Moffitt, like a great name.
Yeah.
But a former teammate of yours who was on that 2002 College World Series Steve Solman,
Yeah.
he's playing in this league. It is an adult wood league, wooden bat baseball league.
Yeah.
And so I was telling Jesse about you guys playing in this league, and he had the same reaction that you had, I think, when Solman, tries to convince you to play in this league. He's like, "What are these guys doing in this league?
Yeah.
Why are they doing this?"
So Steve, I don't know that Steve ever really was trying to convince me to do it. He was he was just like,
but he
"Hey,
was
this
just
is a
telling
thing.
you about it." Okay.
Yeah, this is a thing." And he first, so I'll back up a little bit. So Steve, we need to be clear. Steve Solman is one of the greatest players in Notre Dame baseball history.
He is. There's
inarguably.
Exactly.
And I was a career reservist. I spent a lot of time in the bullpen warming guys up, so very different Notre Dame careers. But that's one of the things that kind of shocked me about it when Steve started telling me about it, is like, why, Steve, what are you doing? Like, if this is not something that appeals to me, why on earth would it appeal to you? You play professional
I envision,
baseball.
like the end of 8 Men Out, where Shoeless Joe is, like playing in the, the league that nobody's heard of and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
No offense, but that's
no.
like...
So the Sappy Moffitt League has existed for 10 years.
Okay.
And the two guys have founded it. One of them is named Matthew Inslee, and Matthew is the chief sustainable farmer at St. Mary's College, and the other one is Mike Hebler, who you mentioned in that opening. And Mike works in the Center for Social Concerns. He's a teacher, he's a writer, he's an artist, and he directs or manages Notre Dame's education and prison programs. And so if you think about these two guys, one a farmer and one an educator who works in these very unique environments, try to imagine a baseball league that is designed by two guys with that value set. And then you start getting closer to what the Sappy Moffitt League is, you know?
Right.
So Mike Hebler and Steve Solman were high school teammates in Cincinnati.
Okay.
And so that's originally where the connection comes from there. But when I moved back to South Bend about 5.5 years ago, and Steve and I were catching up, he said, "Hey, there's something that I'm involved with here that you might find pretty interesting." And he started telling me about this. And at first I was like, no, I'm not. Because when you hear about an adult baseball league, you start thinking of guys taking themselves too seriously. You know, all this, like, what would be the point? Come on, we turned the page a long time ago.
Right.
And Steve was laughing, and he was like, I understand why you say that. He said, but this is not exactly that kind of thing. And if it was, I wouldn't be interested pretty much. And so then I started learning more about it. It still took me a few years before I gave it a whirl. But you know, one of the things that doesn't make it into the article, for instance, is and this was kind of the first thing that drew me to the league is that every summer a group of guys from this league, they partner with the Moreau College Initiative, which is Holy Cross's degree program that's run out of Westville Correctional Prison, State Prison, west of South Bend. They go and play a baseball game in the prison against against the students in that degree program.
Okay.
And I had heard about that from Steve, and that was the first thing that kind of clued me into, oh, this is something different than guys just trying to relive the glory days, you know. And then I started learning about some of the other things that they do, and their main sort of, you know, it's sort of like a civic and social club as much as it is a baseball league. And the main sort of thrust of the league is this project called the Foundry Field Project,
right?
Where they're building.
I'm glad you got us in there, because that's that's the crux of your article as well.
Yeah, so. and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Right.
But you know, Steve and I joke. So last summer was my first full summer doing it with the Sappy Moffitt League, and it was just so fun. You know, it's not about winning. It's not, you know, you maybe are trying to have fun with yourself or whatever, and you have to sort of actively resist those naturally competitive impulses that come up. But I just had so much. Steve played shortstop and I played second base, and we just look at each other and laugh, you know, constantly during the games. And I remember him saying to me one day, he's like, every week, he's like, you know, he's a couple years older than I am. I'm just about to turn 40. You know, I haven't stayed in the best shape, you know, and like every week you're starting to get ready, and you're like, oh, why am I doing this? And then you get out there and you just have so much fun. And it's as much about like being there with other guys and there are women in the league too, just being there with everybody and playing a game together. It's as much about having the beer after the game, you know, with everybody, and just kind of connecting in a different space of playing a game that people leave behind when they're very young, you know?
Absolutely. And you know, one of the things about the specifics of how the games are played, no curveballs, and the pitchers are basically there to facilitate the hitters sort of putting the ball in play. You know, it's like a notch above slow pitch softball. It sounds, you know, it's like get the ball over the plate and, you know, just let guys try to hit the ball.
Yeah, you got to, you know, it's regular pitching. You just can't throw any off speed stuff. So you got to have somebody that can throw strikes, and you got to have somebody that can put enough on it to keep it straight, you know? And so it's, but they're from the mound, you know, so it's meant to be like a batting practice fastball.
Sure.
Yeah, it's fun.
But the Foundry Field aspect of this is, you know, again, that's like the crux of what you're writing about. You got into it with the sort of minutia and the, you know, the details of you and the other guys who play in this league. But Foundry Field, as you wrote, a quest to bring a quality and publicly accessible ballpark to a baseball-less city neighborhood. So expand on that part of it, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So the location is in Southeast Neighborhood Community Park. It's on Wanger Street and High Street in South Bend, kind of right off Sample, right next to the Boys and Girls Club. And there's a big empty field there in that park. And the idea really originated with Matthew Inslee passing by that area years ago and thinking like, oh, this looks like a perfect spot for a baseball park, just sort of like a romantic vision of where a baseball park would be. And over time, the ideas developed. And a lot of the other people in the league are involved in youth athletics in South Bend. Milt Lee, who you mentioned, who plays for the Larks,
Yep.
is
I know him from way back. Yep.
yeah. He's K-12 athletic director for South Bend schools.
Right.
There are all kinds of folks involved with the league, and so this project really, my understanding is the project really started gaining some steam in the couple years before the pandemic, and then it really stalled with the pandemic.
Sure.
But they had started raising money, had started outlining it. They'd met with the Southeast organized area residents. They have a really great little community of neighbors that are really sort of engaged in that area. Met with the Boys and Girls Club, South Bend schools, everybody trying to get this project going. And then last year, coming out of the pandemic, they really sort of tried to put the pedal to the metal and get it going. And they with the community, they got a lot of people involved. It wasn't called Foundry Field until last year. That name emerged as they started thinking with the South Bend History Museum and the Center for Civil Rights Heritage. And they started looking at baseball history in South Bend and discovering some things that are really, I don't know how commonly these things are known about South Bend, but South Bend has a really vibrant baseball history. Particularly when you start looking at the history of Factory League baseball in South Bend. And so Foundry Field, that name comes from a team called the Foundry Giants that played in South Bend. They were foundry workers. It was an all-black team in the Studebaker Company that were playing in a league that was primarily white, that had former and on their way to being Negro League stars. There were a lot of guys that played on that team that became really important civic figures in South Bend, and in addition to that, I think this project is meant to do a few things. This neighborhood is like a lot of other neighborhoods in our country where kids don't necessarily get exposed to the game of baseball. So there's an opportunity here for there to be a place where there's a quality, publicly available baseball field where kids can be exposed to baseball. So I know that it's going to be right next to the Boys and Girls Club. They'll be able to use it. Riley High School's right down the street. Other things that other groups that might be able to use the field, and who knows what might come from that. But part of it also is this idea that the field can become a space for storytelling and remembering history and memorializing things, but also kind of creating new baseball stories for South Bend. So one of the neatest aspects of the project, I think, is that the outfield wall, the left field wall, right in front of where the train goes by, is going to have a series of murals on it.
Okay.
And so the first mural, and they're going to basically tell the stories of sort of forgotten South Bend baseball legacies. And so the first mural, there's an artist named Detour is his artist name, who's coming to South Bend next month, in about a month, to start working on the first mural. And he's going to be working with the Boys and Girls Club and with Riley High School and with students from Notre Dame. And he's going to be doing a mural of the Foundry Giants. That'll be the first one. And they've got 5 or 6 other murals that are planned. And they've been discovering through research that Notre Dame faculty and students are doing, that people in the community are doing, other teams. There's a Potawatomi baseball team that they've been looking at from early 1900s. There's some different women's teams, and a black female softball team that kind of barnstormed around. So they've been finding a lot of neat stuff and things that can become stories that are told and memorialized at this place.
Yeah, so there's almost as much of a museum aspect to it as the actual playing of baseball and access to baseball itself, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so. And what I like about it is the idea that like the game of baseball becomes something that connects people to the past and the future, that it helps generate connection, this field can become sort of this magical space where people can learn things about themselves and their communities and and can discuss the future that they want to have together. And I just like that baseball can fit into things in that way. When you grow up in a baseball family, right, where as you mentioned, my grandfather, documentary, and then my dad, right, they're coaches, and my family's livelihood for generations depended on wins and losses, essentially, right? And that's not why they became coaches because they wanted to win games. They became coaches for other reasons. They wanted to impact people. But baseball is a game where, the longer you stick with it, right, the primary reasons you're in it are to win games, right, or to not lose games.
Right.
And then when you look at youth baseball all across America, the things that are privileged are, how do I get the most exposure for future opportunities? Who's going to develop me the best? How do I get on the best travel team? How do I
say travel baseball?
Yeah. And so I have a sense that I think we've kind of lost baseball as a thing that can be recreation, or a thing for kids to have fun doing, or for people generally to have fun doing it. It occupies all these other sort of grimmer spaces.
And you mentioned how there's no city-sponsored rec leagues in South Bend.
Mm-hmm.
Like the city I grew up in, much, a fraction of the size of South Bend, but we had like all of our sports when we were growing up: basketball, baseball, football, all of it. It was through the city Parks and Rec department, and they were pretty big leagues, especially considering it was a town of, around 35, 40,000, something like that. But the fact that you don't have that kind of access in a city the size of South Bend, I guess kind of speaks to the need for something like this.
Yeah, and that's not unique to South Bend. I mean, that's
not at all. It's where we are now. Yeah,
that's true all over the country. And I mean, you can kind of understand it. I mean, the anytime that money is involved in the develop, youth sport, I think it's like a $19 billion industry on a yearly basis now in America, right? Not just baseball, but every sport. And so when you have these models that are run by, people figure out how to make a buck by selling a dream in really desperate marketplaces.
That's very true. Yes.
And so when money is involved, we just naturally gravitate towards these more efficient things, right? So baseball leagues started to be modeled on that. How do we get the most out of it? How do we, as players, as families, how do we get people to pay the most money for it? And what gets squeezed out is everybody that might be coming to baseball for a different reason. There are a lot of different ways to come to the game of baseball. There are a lot of different ways to love the game of baseball, but baseball top to bottom has not been a really good place for appreciating or privileging all those other ways of loving the game.
Right. And like when you look at where, using Major League Baseball as the example, that just the demographic of the fan of baseball, it's getting older every year, and part of it, I think, a big part of it has to do with what you're talking about. You're not going to have, these, if you don't grow up with at least some involvement in baseball, the odds are you're not going to be, a baseball fan by the time you're an adult. And that's, I think that's part of that gap right now that baseball has.
Yeah. How would you ever learn about it? There's, this is in the article, and it was such a great moment. And I was very lucky to have been there and witnessed it. But last summer at the Foundry Field location, the Sappy Moffitt Field Foundation guys, the neighborhood, other individuals were there to sort of have a formal announcement of the project, right? And the sun was going down. It was a nice summer night, and they had put out in the grass a home plate, and they had lined the foul lines to show people where it would be. They had the drawings of what the stadium will look like on an easel. Different speakers kind of talked about what the project would be, and it was really neat to be able to kind of visualize it. And while everybody is standing around, there's a little boy from the neighborhood who kind of just quietly sidles up to the plate and takes a phantom swing and starts running the bases. And not many people notice him until he's almost home. And then everybody kind of drops their conversations, starts cheering for him. And Sean Kennedy, who's one of the Sappy Moffitt Field Foundation guys, grabs the microphone and says, "The first Foundry Field home run." And it was such a great moment. And then I came to find out from the boy's aunt, who he lives with right there near the project. He's 10 years old. And 2 days before this, he didn't even know what baseball was. There had been a film crew out there filming a promo for the project, and they had gloves and bats. And he just wandered out and was asking him, "Hey, what's this?" Pointing to the baseball bat. "And how do you play baseball?" And so they got him involved playing with some other kids out there for the film. And then he's there at the project. He's never played baseball in his life, never watched it. And by the end of the year, his aunt told me, "Well, now I bought him a glove. I've got him a bat. He's ready. He wants to play. He can't wait for this to be here." And that's just one little example. But you just think, like, if it was accessible for people, how different would it be? How different could it be?
Yeah.
And I like the idea that this isn't a project that's trying to change the world. It's just trying to, right here, where we can be shepherds of it. What can we do to kind of create a healthy culture around baseball for people?
Absolutely. And so where is the stage of the project right now, the Foundry Field I think that I read that phase 1 is complete. Phases 2 and 3 are kind of still, on the horizon. Or are they still trying to raise funds for that aspect of it? Where exactly is everything? Or is it right now?
So they are still going to be raising funds for phase 2 and phase 3. But phase 1 is complete. Phase 1 they completed by the end of last year. Part of that was a matching grant that they got through a state building places foundation. But phase 1 includes basically the field itself, the backstop, and then a little bit of phase 2 that they've got is the first mural.
Okay.
But the first mural is going to be painted in about a month's time. They've got a groundbreaking event on site happening on May 12th. And so that's when they're going to kind of start construction on the field. Hopefully at some point next year, I think by next fall, maybe, the field will be playable. And then phase 2 is where a lot of the additional really neat stuff comes in. I think a lot of the murals, a vintage style scoreboard, a living hedge outfield wall in right field. And then I think I can't remember phase 2 or phase 3, but one of them is going to be a vintage style covered grandstand for people to come and watch games. So it's all those extra touches that are going to make it, a really cool ballpark that will be happening in phase 2 and 3. And so those funding campaigns will be going.
Absolutely. And there's a website, foundryfield.org, and the artist renderings and a lot of other information is on that website for people who are interested, in any of that, whether it's donating or, any of that kind of stuff, I assume. So
yep, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Great stuff, Nick.
Yeah.
I wanted to read just a little bit more from your article. All right.
Go for it.
Oh, the pleasure of fielding a ground ball. The unconscious calculus of feet, hands, angles, the ball skipping along its low vector. Sometimes I swear I can feel the ball in the ground through the soles of my spikes. Today I range on legs grown sluggish with eggs and sloth. But this, I remember now, was maybe my favorite thing to do in life ever. And the infield clay is the same moon dust hue as the dry surface beneath the Rocky Mountains where long ago my father hit me fungos. How is that possible, or is my memory true, and does it matter? I mean, it's like I'm getting chills just sitting here thinking about that, just the visualization and all the feels that I feel right. Have you thought about, and I may have asked you this last time, did you read like Roger Angel? Have you ever read his stuff growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like there are plenty of guys who can sit at a baseball game and write a recap or, write about baseball or whatever. But I feel like baseball needs more Nick Mainieri right now. I'm just telling you. I'm just
Thank you,
telling you.
Sean. Yeah, thank you. I
It's
appreciate it.
it's really it really is. You know, like it reminds me, you know, of like if you ever read what was the piece called? The Web of the Game. It was the one. It was a Roger Angel piece where he showed up to a college baseball game where Frank Viola and St. John's were taking on Ron Darling and Yale one day, and Smokin' Joe Wood is in the stands at this game, and it's like reading this piece reminded me of that, just like the feel of being there. It's just a great piece. I really.
That's an incredible compliment. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Did you, by the way, again, I think I saw this on Twitter. Did you go to the World Baseball Classic? Were you doing some work there?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So I went out there to write a story that hopefully, I don't know, this is for a different magazine. I'm not sure when it's going to be out yet, but I've turned it in, and I'll be sure to put that out there once I know it's coming out. But I went out there actually to write a story about our old buddy John Axford, who was a teammate of mine at Notre Dame,
right?
And longtime major league reliever and kind of all-time great guy and great character. But he was kind of making the final comeback of his career to pitch for Team Canada in the World Baseball Classic. So I went out there to follow him around and write a story about that. So hopefully that'll see the light of day here sometime soon. I'll be sure to put it out there.
I didn't realize he was doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I was really happy for him. You know, he's an awesome guy. Had a great career. And I'm not sure if you remember, but he had sort of his last comeback and was in the big leagues again with the Brewers a couple of years ago. And in his first outing blew out his elbow, you know, again for the second time in his career. So this was the comeback from that. Can I do it one more time? And
one more comeback.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how did it go? Can you like? Okay for him? Or
he had a great moment. He had a couple great outings, and I think it went perfect. You know, and his whole family was there. He had 16 family members there, and it was really a special moment for him. You know,
that's excellent.
Team Canada went into the last day of their pool, and it was either them or Mexico were going to advance, and they lost to Mexico.
Mexico obviously advanced
in that last game. Yeah, but it's a really fun event. You know, the World Baseball Classic is something I've not paid especially close attention to over the years, in the times that it's happened. But it was really a lot of fun, and then I think everybody kind of followed the finals really closely because they were so fun.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This is like my season of getting reconnected to the game of baseball and
that's
falling
great.
in love with it all over again. Yeah.
Well, I hope we keep seeing more. Like I said, I hope we keep seeing more. The summer gives you plenty of time, I hope, to do some of that kind of stuff.
Well, you know how it is, man. If you're gonna write, you just got to find the time to do it. You know.
That's right. Go find yourself a little place on Cape Cod and spend some time out there. Like that's the perfect use of your summer, right?
Yeah. If you get any leads on that, let me know.
I know, because it's like I'm sure it's really cheap to do that too. So, all right, Nick, it was great catching up with you. I appreciate it. And again, foundryfield.org is where folks can go if you want to find out more about the Foundry League and it sounds like a lot of fun. I hope you and Steve. I can't imagine that Steve is hitting much below 1,000. You know, like you said, just with the way things work. So
yeah, Steve's incredible. He looks the same to me as he ever did. You know, he doesn't think so, but I think so.
That's right. Yeah. All right. Take care. Thanks again, Nick.
Sean, thanks so much, man.